Alex Eala had every reason to walk off that court in silence. She had just lost 6-4, 6-0. The second set had been brutal. Her 7-match winning streak was over. The momentum that had carried her from Washington to Toronto had finally been stopped, and it had happened on one of the biggest stages of her young career. For a player who had spent the previous 2 weeks winning almost everything in front of her, this was the kind of defeat that could leave you searching for the quickest possible escape. Handshake. Wave. Locker room. Silence. Nobody would have blamed her. But Alex Eala didn't disappear. Instead, the 21-year-old from Quezon City picked up a microphone, turned toward the thousands of Filipino supporters filling the stadium, and did something that made the defeat feel almost secondary. She spoke to them in Tagalog. And she thanked them. Not for helping her win. Not because they had guaranteed her another victory. She thanked them for everything else. For staying up late. For praying for her. For following her journey. For supporting her regardless of the score. And suddenly, the story coming out of Toronto wasn't really about a 6-4, 6-0 loss anymore. It was about something much deeper. It was about identity. It was about gratitude. It was about a young athlete realizing that the people watching her from thousands of miles away were sacrificing their own time simply to be part of her journey. And it was about what happens when an athlete understands that representing a country isn't just about winning trophies. Sometimes, it's about standing in front of your people when you've just lost and telling them that you see them. That is what made this moment different. Because on paper, this was simply a round of 16 exit at a WTA 1000 event. But if you were actually watching what happened in Toronto, you knew immediately that this was something much bigger. So, let's go back to the beginning. Because without the context, you miss why that microphone moment mattered so much. Alex Eala arrived in Toronto carrying the biggest wave of momentum of her career. Just days earlier, she had accomplished something historic in Washington. She won her first WTA Tour-level singles title at the Mubadala City DC Open, defeating Jessica Pegula in the final and becoming the first Filipino player in history to win a WTA Tour-level singles championship. That alone could have been the defining achievement of an entire season. For Eala, it became the beginning of another chapter. Instead of celebrating for weeks, she traveled to Canada and immediately went back to work. Toronto was supposed to be the next challenge. Instead, it became the next stage of her rise. In her opening match, Eala faced Alicia Parks. There was history between the two. Parks had previously defeated Eala at the Australian Open, meaning this wasn't simply another first-round assignment. It was an opportunity for Eala to answer a previous defeat. And she did. She won. But what happened after the match was almost as revealing as what happened during it. Eala grabbed the microphone and spoke directly to the Filipino supporters who had filled the stands. She acknowledged the flags. She acknowledged the noise. She acknowledged the people who had traveled to watch her. And she told them to keep waving those flags. That was the first major sign that something unusual was happening in Toronto. Eala wasn't treating the crowd as background atmosphere. She was actively engaging with them. She knew they were there. She knew why they were there. And she made sure they knew that she knew. Then came Katie McNally. And that match tested everything Eala had. It wasn't clean. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't the kind of match where a rising star simply walks onto the court and overwhelms an opponent. It was a fight. Eala won the opening set, but then suffered an injury scare. She rolled her ankle while chasing a shot. She needed treatment. She also had a blister developing on her foot. The match became increasingly physical. At one point, Eala had the opportunity to serve for the match at 5-4 in the second set. She couldn't close it. McNally fought back. The second set disappeared. Suddenly, Eala was facing a deciding set after having already spent enormous physical energy just trying to get through the match. This was the point where the 7-match winning streak could have ended. But somehow, she found another level. She won the deciding set. 6-3, 5-7, 6-4. The match lasted more than 2.5 hours. And when it ended, Eala was emotional. She had survived. The 7-match winning streak remained alive. But more importantly, she had shown something that statistics don't always capture. She could suffer and continue. She could get hurt and continue. She could lose momentum and continue. That victory changed the feeling around her Toronto campaign. She wasn't simply the player who had just won Washington. She was becoming the player nobody wanted to face. And waiting in the next round was Belinda Bencic, an Olympic gold medalist, a former world number 4, a player with years of experience competing at the highest levels of women's tennis. This was no ordinary opponent. The pressure was enormous. Eala entered the match with 7 consecutive victories behind her. She had won her first WTA title. She had just survived an exhausting 3-set battle. She had an entire community behind her. And expectations were rising with every match. Then the match started. Bencic was composed, controlled, clinical. She didn't give Eala the kind of rhythm she had enjoyed during her previous matches. The first set was competitive, 6-4. There was still a path back. But then came the second set, and everything unraveled, 6-0. A bagel, the kind of scoreline that can make a professional athlete feel completely exposed. The winning streak was gone. The dream run in Toronto was over. And for Eala, the emotional crash was immediate. She later acknowledged that once the match began slipping away from her, she struggled to pull herself out of the emotional spiral. That admission matters. Because athletes are often expected to speak in polished language after defeat. They're supposed to say they learned something. They're supposed to say they'll come back stronger. They're supposed to talk about the positives. Eala didn't pretend the loss didn't hurt. She admitted that it did. She admitted that she struggled. And then she did something even more remarkable. She stayed. Think about how unusual that is. You are 21 years old. You have just won the biggest title of your career. You have traveled from Washington to Toronto. You have played 7 consecutive winning matches. You have survived an injury scare. You have carried the expectations of an entire country. And then you lose 6-4, 6-0. The easiest thing in the world would be to leave. Nobody would criticize you. Nobody would say you owed them a speech. Nobody would say you had to stand there and explain your emotions. But Eala picked up the microphone. And instead of giving a generic English language interview, she spoke in Tagalog. That decision changed the entire atmosphere. She opened with a message to her fellow Filipinos. Salamat bayan. Thank you, my fellow countrymen. Those words were important, not because they were complicated, because they were personal. Eala wasn't speaking to tennis executives. She wasn't speaking to sponsors. She wasn't speaking to international media. She was speaking directly to the Filipino community. And then she thanked them for the things that most people watching from the outside might never fully understand. She thanked them for praying for her. She thanked them for staying awake late at night to watch her matches. She thanked them for supporting her regardless of whether she won or lost. And finally, she promised to keep working. That last part may have been the most powerful. She didn't promise that she would win every match. She didn't promise another title immediately. She promised to work. That is a completely different kind of statement. Because winning is never entirely under an athlete's control. Working is. Preparation is. Effort is. Commitment is. And Eala was telling her supporters that their sacrifices had been noticed and that she would answer those sacrifices with continued effort. Think about what those fans had actually been doing. Eala was playing in North America. The time difference between Toronto and the Philippines meant that many matches were happening extremely late at night or in the early hours of the morning back home. For a fan in Manila, watching Eala live could mean setting an alarm for 2 or 3 in the morning. It could mean staying awake while everyone else in the house was sleeping. It could mean gathering around a television or phone in the middle of the night. And yet they kept doing it, night after night, match after match, win after win. And when Eala finally lost, she remembered them. That is what makes the moment so powerful. She didn't only appreciate them when they were celebrating with her. She appreciated them when she had nothing to celebrate. And the crowd understood. Because when Eala finished speaking, the Filipino supporters didn't turn away. They stood. They applauded. They gave her a standing ovation. A player had just lost 6-4, 6-0. And the crowd responded as if she had won. That tells you everything. They weren't applauding the result. They were applauding the journey. They were applauding the title in Washington. They were applauding the 7-match winning streak. They were applauding the fight against McNally. They were applauding the fact that a young Filipino woman had brought thousands of people together inside a Canadian tennis stadium. And perhaps most importantly, they were applauding the fact that she had remembered them. That is something sports often forgets. Athletes and fans can become separated. The athlete becomes the person on the television. The fans become numbers in an attendance report. But in Toronto, that separation disappeared. Eala looked directly at the people who had traveled to support her and spoke to them as members of the same community. Not customers, not followers, not an audience. Family. That is why the language mattered. Eala is perfectly capable of conducting interviews in English. She does it regularly. English is the working language of international professional tennis. Press conferences happen in English. Sponsors communicate in English. Television broadcasts operate in English. But when Eala wanted to say something deeply personal, she switched to Tagalog. That wasn't accidental. Tagalog was the language of home. It was the language that carried the emotional weight. And the people she was speaking to understood immediately. That distinction is important. English was the language of the professional athlete. Tagalog was the language of the Filipina daughter speaking to her people. And Toronto was thousands of miles away from Manila. Yet suddenly, for a few moments, the stadium felt like home. That is the power of sport at its best. It can take people from different places, different backgrounds, different generations, and create a shared emotional experience. And Eala has been building that connection for a long time. This wasn't the first time she had shown this side of herself. Go back to Eastbourne. She had reached her first WTA singles final. The achievement itself was historic. No Filipino player had ever reached a WTA singles final before. But she lost. The defeat was heartbreaking. She was visibly emotional. She cried. And yet, even in that moment, Eala did what she has repeatedly done throughout her career. She congratulated her opponent. Then she turned her attention back toward what the achievement meant for the Philippines. She talked about being proud to represent her country. She talked about the significance of becoming the first Filipino player to reach that stage. And she made a promise. This was only the beginning. She would work harder. She would try to do more. That same pattern appeared during her breakthrough run in Miami. Eala was still a relatively unknown name internationally. She was ranked far outside the world's elite. Then she upset Madison Keys. Suddenly, the tennis world was watching. And once again, her immediate instinct was to communicate with home. That pattern matters, because it tells us that Toronto wasn't a one-time public relations moment. It wasn't something a team manufactured. It wasn't a carefully constructed image. It was consistent with who Eala has shown herself to be. When she wins, she remembers where she came from. When she loses, she remembers where she came from. When the cameras are everywhere, she remembers where she came from. And that is one of the reasons her rise has resonated so strongly with Filipino fans. Tennis has never occupied the same place in Filipino sports culture as basketball or boxing. Basketball is everywhere. Boxing has produced national icons. Manny Pacquiao became more than an athlete. He became a cultural symbol. But tennis never had that same mainstream connection. Then came Eala, a young woman from Quezon City, a player who developed her game internationally, a player who trained relentlessly, a player who began appearing on the biggest courts in the world. And suddenly, people who might never have watched professional tennis before were staying awake to watch a teenager or a young woman from their country compete against some of the best players on earth. That is bigger than rankings. That is bigger than prize money. That is cultural impact. And Toronto provided the clearest example yet. The Filipino supporters didn't merely attend. They transformed the atmosphere. They brought flags. They brought shirts. They brought families. They brought energy. And they made Eala's matches feel like national events. That is why her decision to speak Tagalog after a painful loss carried such weight. She was acknowledging a relationship that had grown far beyond tennis. She wasn't simply a player with Filipino fans. She had become a symbol for a community. And perhaps that's why the standing ovation after the 6-0 second set felt so extraordinary. The fans were telling her something too. You don't have to win every time for us to be proud of you. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to carry the entire country on your back. We're still here. That may have been the most important message of the night, because athletes at the highest level can become trapped by expectations. Every victory creates another expectation. Every ranking increase creates another target. Every historic achievement makes the next achievement feel mandatory. For Eala, the pressure was already increasing. She had just won Washington. She had just become the first Filipino WTA Tour singles champion. She arrived in Toronto with a 7-match winning streak. Suddenly, everyone wanted more. Another final, another title, another upset, another historic achievement.
But tennis doesn't work that way.
Sometimes you lose. Sometimes you play badly. Sometimes your opponent is simply better. And sometimes, after everything you've accomplished, you walk onto a court and lose 6-0. That's sport. The question isn't whether Eala will lose again.
She will.
Every great player does.
The
question is how she responds. And Toronto gave us an early answer. She responded with honesty, then gratitude, then a promise to work. That combination is powerful. There is also something revealing about the physical context of the match. Eala didn't arrive in Toronto fresh. She had just played an exhausting tournament in Washington. She had won the title. Then she traveled. Then she started another tournament. She played multiple matches. She fought through an ankle issue. She needed treatment. She survived a 3-set battle. And then she faced Bencic, a player with Olympic gold and enormous experience. At some point, the body and mind simply reach a limit. The result against Bencic may have looked shocking on the scoreboard, but the larger context tells a different story. It doesn't diminish Bencic's performance. She was excellent. She took control. She executed. She deserved the victory. But it also reminds us that Eala's 7-match streak wasn't going to last forever. And that's okay. The remarkable thing wasn't that the streak ended. The remarkable thing was what Eala had already accomplished before it ended. She won her first WTA title. She defeated top-level opponents. She entered another major tournament and kept winning. She drew enormous crowds. She connected with an international community. And then, when the run finally stopped, she left the court with her head held high. That is the bigger picture. And there is another reason this moment matters. Representation is not only about being visible when everything is going well. It's about being visible when things aren't perfect. A young Filipino child watching Eala doesn't only need to see her holding a trophy. They need to see her lose. They need to see her struggle. They need to see her admit that she got emotional. They need to see her recover. They need to see her thank her community, because that teaches something more valuable than perfection. It teaches that failure doesn't cancel identity. Losing doesn't make you less Filipino. Losing doesn't make you less worthy of support. Losing doesn't erase everything you accomplished before it. And Eala demonstrated that without giving a speech about it. She simply stood at the microphone. She spoke. She thanked them. And then she left. That's leadership without trying to look like leadership. That's representation without needing to announce itself as representation. And that's probably why the moment resonated so strongly. It felt real. There was no trophy in her hands. No celebration. No confetti. No championship photograph. Just a young athlete who had lost badly and still wanted to tell her people that she appreciated them. Sometimes those are the moments that define careers more than victories do. After Toronto, Eala planned to take a short break before returning to competition. A day or two away from tennis. Then Cincinnati. Then the next tournament. Then the next challenge. That's how professional tennis works. You lose 1 week. You travel to another city. You practice. You recover. You compete again. The rankings keep moving. The draw changes. The opponents change. But the journey continues. And if Eala follows the pattern she has already established, the Toronto loss won't become a setback. It will become another chapter. Because the player who walked off that court isn't the same player who arrived in Washington. She has learned what it feels like to win a WTA title. She has learned what it feels like to carry enormous expectations. She has learned what it feels like to play while injured. She has learned what it feels like to have thousands of people cheering for her. And now she has learned what it feels like to lose badly in front of them. That last lesson may be one of the most valuable of all. Because eventually, every great athlete has to learn that the crowd cannot save you from every defeat. Your country cannot win every point for you. Your fans cannot hit the next forehand. They can support you. They can encourage you. They can pray for you. They can stay awake until 3 in the morning. But eventually, you have to walk onto the court alone. And Eala understands that. Yet she also understands something else. She doesn't have to walk through the entire journey alone. That's what the Filipino supporters in Toronto showed her. And that's what she gave back to them with those words in Tagalog. So, was the 6-4, 6-0 loss disappointing? Absolutely. Was it a painful way to end a 7-match winning streak? Without question. Was the second set difficult to watch?
Yes.
But was that the real story?
No.
The real story was what happened afterward. A 21-year-old athlete stood in front of thousands of people after the worst result of her week and chose gratitude instead of disappearance. She spoke to her people in their language. She thanked them for staying awake. She thanked them for praying. She thanked them for believing. And she promised to keep working. The crowd answered with a standing ovation. That moment captured something the rankings can never measure. It captured connection. It captured pride. It captured the relationship between an athlete and a community that sees far more than a tennis player when it looks at her. And maybe that's the most important thing Alex Eala has built so far. Not a ranking. Not a trophy. Not even a winning streak. A connection. A connection between a global sport and a country that has been waiting for someone to represent it on the stage. A connection between a young athlete and fans willing to stay awake in the middle of the night just to watch her compete. A connection between Toronto and Manila. Between a tennis court and a community. Between victory and defeat. And ultimately between Alex Eala and the people she calls her own. The loss will eventually disappear into the statistics. Years from now, people may look at the tournament record and see only one line. Eala lost 6-4, 6-0 to Belinda Bencic. But the people who were there will remember something else. They'll remember the flags. They'll remember the noise. They'll remember the 7-match winning streak.